The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're learning more and more about the timeline and sequence of events surrounding what we now know to be undeniable, confirmed intent to collude with Russia for the benefit of Donald Trump's candidacy. And the claim that we've heard now from both Donald Trump Jr. and Donald Trump Sr. and a bunch of other people that Donald Trump, the president, didn't know anything about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with this Russian lawyer, presumably to get dirt about Hillary Clinton until just a few days ago. That assertion is increasingly suspect. The New York Times and a number of other media outlets have put together the timeline of it started with, well, on the day of the meeting was Donald Trump at Trump Tower, and we determined that yes, indeed, he was. But there's actually a series of public events and bullet points, time points that we can look at, which make the assertion that Trump was just completely clueless about this very, very difficult to believe. Let's put the timeline up on the screen for people who are watching with us. Let's go back to June 7th at 6:14 p.m. June 7th at 6:14 p.m., Donald Trump Jr. confirmed the meeting with the Russian lawyer, a meeting ostensibly believed to be, the intent of the meeting being that the Russian lawyer had dirt on Hillary Clinton for the Trump campaign. That was confirmed by Donald Trump Jr. at 6:14 p.m. Eastern time on June 7th. Now, in that confirmation, Donald Trump Jr. explained that he would love it if there was dirt on Hillary Clinton. He said that he would get the Russian lawyer's name to security. And upon being told that this meeting was part of the broader Russian campaign to help his dad become president of the United States, he seemed completely unfazed by it in a way that suggests that was not the first time that he was hearing that. Just 3 hours later, on that same day, June 7th of 2016, Donald Trump promised to give a speech exposing what he described as Hillary Clinton's corrupt dealings and favorable treatment to foreign governments, including Russia, which would have been exactly the type of information that they would have been expecting to receive at the 3-hour-old scheduling of this meeting with a Russian lawyer. That in and of itself is very odd timing. Skip to June 9th, 2 days later, 4 p.m. Eastern time, when the actual meeting took place. Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort met with the Russian lawyer. This is the meeting that was confirmed on June 7th. It actually took place on June 9th at 4 p.m. We now know that Donald Trump Sr. was at Trump Tower at that point, the time of the meeting. Just 40 minutes later, and remember, we were told this was a short meeting. In fact, Donald Trump Jr. said to Sean Hannity in an interview 2 nights ago, the meeting was 20 or 30 minutes long. 40 minutes after, Pat, the meeting presumably started at 4:40 p.m. Eastern on June 9th, Donald Trump goes to Twitter and all of a sudden is tweeting about Hillary Clinton's deleted emails. And we actually have the tweet to show you. Donald Trump, 4:40 p.m. on the dot, June 9th, 2016. How long did it take your staff of 823 people to think that up? And where are your 33,000 emails that you deleted? The White House was asked about this obviously suspicious timing. They said it is merely a coincidence. Do you believe in this type of coincidence at this point, Pat?
That would take something otherworldly, I would say. And then within the next month, you had the DNC hacked emails starting to get released.
Yep.
You had Trump during a speech publicly inviting the Russians to find the 30,000 missing emails from Hillary Clinton. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And I think these people, maybe they're criminals, but they're certainly not smart criminals.
They're not criminal geniuses. Let's put it that way. I think what happened is the following. The meeting is scheduled to talk about this in more detail. Donald Trump clearly hears about the meeting. He gets very, very excited, and he starts teasing at this speech off the cuff. We're going to get some really good stuff on Hillary Clinton really, really soon. The meeting then happens. It's about what Russia collected. They're clearly willing to share it with the Trump campaign. We heard from Donald Trump Jr. that Jared Kushner didn't stay in the meeting long. Maybe the reason he left the meeting so quickly is he was so excited himself about this that he went to tell Donald Trump Sr. about it. I don't know. We're sort of speculating. And then Donald Trump, even more excited at this point, starts tweeting about it to Hillary Clinton with the hope that she'll get scared or whatever the case may be. That's a pretty reasonable scenario for what went on here, given everything we know about the personalities and histories of these individuals.
Exactly. I think most people would have the foresight and the self-control to just let this whole thing simmer for a little bit.
Sure.
But that's just not in their nature. Donald Trump goes directly to Twitter.
And do we really believe anything that Trump says at this point? The trend is they are willing to admit only what has broken in the news or is about to break in the news. The Trump Jr. emails are a great example of this. Donald Trump Jr. a couple days ago deciding to release the full email chain in the interests of transparency. The truth is that the New York Times had that email chain and was about to release it. And Donald Trump Jr. attempted to mitigate some of the potential damage it would do by releasing it himself, supposedly because of transparency. They will only admit to what has already been reported and is undeniable or is about to be reported by media.
And usually when these things break, Trump Sr. will go to Twitter and try to debunk it the best that he can, or just write it off as fake
or whatever,
news. And for this instance, he really couldn't. All he said was that his son was being open and transparent. So I guess it's okay.
Think about how much is publicly known about this right now. And just imagine what Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor in the Russia-Trump investigation, might have right now. I said a couple of months ago, and I've said it multiple times, that if you're wishing for or waiting around for the impeachment or resignation of Donald Trump, you should really think about whether that's the best thing. Because if Donald Trump were to be impeached, that might enable Republicans to actually start getting things done if they get out from under the constant media pressure around Trump Russia and the inability to actually get stuff done. Trump's impeachment could end up hurting Democrats in the midterms or in the primaries. And I floated the idea, I think it was about 6-8 weeks ago, that the best scenario for Democrats could be for Donald Trump to stay in office, riddled with the constantly growing revelations about Trump Russia, unable to do a damn thing as a result of constantly doing damage control for it. And this could serve as a sort of reminder to voters in the 2018 midterms or in the 2020 election of the atrocious disaster that people voted for that has gotten nothing done for 2 or 4 years at that point. That has sort of been coming to fruition. We are now seeing a level of paralysis and increasingly finger pointing at the White House, which have really escalated over the last 7 to 10 days as a result of the Donald Trump Jr. email scandal with the Russian lawyer. A top Republican close to the West Wing said that the, quote, White House is paralyzed. Trump again is off on a trip, this time to Paris, with 0 additional accomplishments since the last trip. The health care bill is on life support, at least the most recent version of the AHCA from the Senate. The tax plan, who's even talking about the tax plan? Barely a mention of the tax plan for weeks or months. Administration officials are saying that Trump is barely leaving the Oval Office over the last few days. His emotions are ranging from furious to frustrated, and that outside the Oval Office, it's just a blame game of finger pointing from one aide and staffer to another. Trump publicly is trying to deny that this is what's going on. He tweeted before his trip yesterday, quote, the White House is functioning perfectly, focused on healthcare, tax cuts, reform, and many other things. I have little time for watching TV. Although if Trump says it, you can almost certainly count on the opposite being true. People on Trump's legal team are saying that Trump is furious, Trump is watching TV, that he's been angry with his personal lawyer, Mark Kasowitz. Apparently, Trump is not liking Mark Kasowitz's strategy, which, if the strategy is to try to get heat off of Trump Russia, Mark Kasowitz has admittedly completely failed with that. The legal team, on the other hand, is not happy about how Trump is handling the Russia issue. The legal team is reportedly displeased that Jared Kushner is going around them and talking directly to Donald Trump about what's going on with Russia without keeping them in the loop. It's leaked that it's not off the table for Trump's lawyer, Mark Kasowitz, potentially to resign. Rumors are flying that members of Trump's family want Chief of Staff Reince Priebus to resign. And the reality at this point, if these truly are the conversations that they're having, Pat, is that your problems are way bigger than Reince Priebus, right? I mean, this is like trying to fix a car that's got a backfiring engine and the exhaust system is missing and it has no wheels by changing the wiper blades.
Oh, just fire Sean Spicer too and it'll be okay. You know, we've heard a lot about how maybe the Trump-Russia scandal will be bad for Democrats because all of the media is focusing on it and allows Republicans, especially in Congress, to sneak through the back door and do whatever they want there.
Sure, and to some degree they have.
And yeah, to some degree that's true. But if it means that the White House has to focus on how they're going to respond to the scandal, hire all these lawyers, it means that they're diverting their attention to that stuff and not their disastrous agenda.
100%. And let me add one more piece of data that we've learned about from the New York Times' great reporting recently. This could be a major revelation, and it's basically going unnoticed. And I read in detail all of the New York Times reporting on this yesterday. Paul Manafort, Paul Manafort, who is one of the most at-risk individuals for possible criminal wrongdoing in the entire Trump-Russia fiasco. Paul Manafort recently mentioned the meeting, this infamous Trump Jr. Kushner-Manafort meeting with the Russian lawyer. Manafort himself, according to the New York Times, mentioned the meeting to congressional investigators that are looking into possible collusion. If Paul Manafort, the person, along with Jared Kushner, most exposed to criminal charges, is apparently cooperating with investigations and proactively disclosing meetings that took place, that's not a good sign if you're Paul Manafort in terms of the direction that this may be going.
It reminds me of Michael Flynn requesting immunity to cooperate fully with the FBI.
Very, very similar. So what are we hoping for at this point? Number one, I hope Mark Kasowitz does resign. Donald Trump had a big problem finding attorneys even willing to represent him. He found Mark Kasowitz. If Mark Kasowitz does resign, that is not going to be good for Trump. Number two, let's hope Paul Manafort is feeling such pressure from this investigation, these investigations, that he continues giving bombshells to investigators. And number three, let's hope for continued paralysis for the White House, because just about everything Donald Trump wants to do federally, all the big federal legislation Trump is working on, healthcare, tax reform, building the wall with Mexico. I mean, it's almost hilarious to even think about the possibility of a Mexican wall that Mexico will pay for at this point. It's just a joke at this point. Everything that Trump wants to do is basically bad. If they're paralyzed by dealing with this, that's a good thing for the American people.
I think that if the year ends and Republicans are able to do virtually nothing when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to tax reform, what reason will they have to stick behind Trump, especially if his approval ratings start to dip even more?
And interestingly, his approval rating has not dipped more. It actually has trickled up just slightly. I mean, we're still in the same range of 36 to 40 with a 3% margin of error. But I am genuinely curious. We don't have approval numbers that are new, right? I mean, we've got approval numbers from a couple of days ago that were collected over the prior 3 days.
Since the Don Jr. story broke.
That's exactly right. I don't know what impact that will have, but we will probably know by tomorrow or Monday. Send me your thoughts. What do you think about this paralysis and finger pointing at the White House? I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Follow either or both of us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Zach Balin. You might not know what membership is because it comes up so infrequently on the show, but the program is mostly funded by memberships and members like Zach Balin, who is signed up at davidpakman.com/membership. I encourage you to sign up. Other ways to support our program include Patreon at patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can make pledges of as little as $1 a month. And if you ever shop on Amazon, you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop. And then everything you buy, you don't have to fill out a form. It won't look any different, but anything you buy will send us a kickback. This morning, I was checking out the David Pakman Show Reddit discussion forum. You know, it's amazing, Pat. We started this discussion forum on Reddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. With fewer than 100 of our viewers and listeners. We now have nearly 4,000 of our audience members who are participating in political discussions on Reddit.
You have to start at 0 and work your way out.
Yeah, I mean, it's normal. Why would we start at 120? It doesn't make, we started at 0, and obviously it's been a process. But that process, as Pat is pointing out, has now led us to almost 4,000 of our viewers. I encourage you to join us there, and I wanted to just quickly talk about some of the interesting discussions taking place there, starting with a discussion about my video on the left devouring itself over Trump-Russia. If that's a topic that is interesting to you, and I know it resonated with many in our audience, go to davidpakman.com/Reddit and talk about it with other viewers. And there's not a unified front on that subject matter. I mean, there are serious disagreements among our audience.
Very controversial clip, and regardless of what side you're on in that discussion, there's going to be some things you hear in that video that's going to upset you.
Probably, yeah, more than likely. Also from our Reddit discussion forum, a post about whether it's worth reaching out to the other side. And I've spoken pretty extensively about how I feel that when it comes to convincing Trumpists with facts, it's just not worth it. I believe that you are way better off working to get people to vote who did not vote last election than you are trying to play point counterpoint with Trumpists to get them to come to your side. Not everybody agrees. Interesting discussion on our Reddit discussion forum. Going on now to another discussion that was happening on our Reddit discussion forum. A lot of analysis of the handshake between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin at the G20 meeting in Germany. And I was not the only person who noticed, Pat, that Trump did not pull any of his domineering handshake games with Vladimir Putin. In fact, quite the opposite. He was fully the beta male in how he put his hand up.
I'm a body language expert over here. Trump has his palm facing up, which
exactly
is a submissive kind of gesture.
Completely. It's the equivalent of Pat's non-feral cat exposing its belly because it trusts Pat so much, or whatever. A dog exposing its belly. I don't know. But yeah, Trump is doing the same thing with his hand. And an interesting discussion of body language happening there. Also on our Reddit discussion forum, there was an interesting reference made to something that I read about actually yesterday, which is that if you want to think about what the right thing is to do when you hear that a foreign power might be interfering in American politics, when Al Gore was given information that might have been to the detriment of George W. Bush, he immediately got in touch with the FBI and gave them everything. Not exactly the approach of the Trump administration, is it?
He had Bush's entire debate talking points. I mean, how valuable is that?
Yeah.
And yet their campaign did the right thing because I don't think they wanted to get themselves into potentially deep waters there.
Yes,
with the law.
And we may learn that actually they might have been able to do it and get away with it because it appears Trump might get away with it himself. We will see. And lastly, from our Reddit discussion forum, a video about bidets. And what it says is David and Lewis discussed this before, but toilet paper doesn't make sense. I use a bidet and so should you. I mean, I couldn't possibly remember every one of the 15,000 topics that we've broached on this program over the years. I don't remember this conversation, but I'm sure at some point I've mentioned that in my birth country of Argentina, bidets are common, and it's often very, very confusing. Many Americans mistaking it for a second toilet in the bathroom.
Oh, that could be bad.
And we don't, have to go into graphic detail about what's going on here, but an interesting video nonetheless.
No, I lived in an apartment for 4 months that had a bidet.
Was this in Spain?
I was just kind of scared. I didn't use it. Yeah,
This was in Spain.
I didn't use it.
You didn't. You were scared of it. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I guess when I've been to Spain, there have been bidets as well, but I don't think I've seen them in France or Belgium.
Oh, really?
I don't think so.
Isn't it a French word?
That's true. Why did I not see bidets in France? That's a really strange thing. Or maybe I just didn't notice it. Anyway, davidpakman.com/Reddit, whether it's the left devouring itself or bidet humor, it's all available at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Okay, there's a real problem going on for progressive YouTubers. I've already told many of you that there's this thing called YouTube adpocalypse as a result of some articles that were written in corporate media alleging that the YouTube ad algorithm is too relaxed. On March 31st, YouTube turned on a new ad algorithm which destroyed the David Pakman Show YouTube channel. And we actually have a sort of revenue graph to put up on the screen for people who may not be aware of what went on. And what you will see on this graph is that we went from point 1 on the graph, where things were going along pretty well, to point 2, which represented a loss of 99% of our revenue. And I was told at the time by YouTube staff that the situation would resolve itself, that we could expect an improvement. And we did see that improvement as we approached point 3 on the graph. We recovered about 30 to 35% of our revenue, and I was hoping that things were on the up and up. But then on July 1st, as you can see by point 4 on this picture, on this graph, we lost about 85 to 88% of our revenue. This has happened for 2 reasons. Number one, the number of ads playing is down to about 30%, meaning that for every 10 video views, only 3 ads are playing. Compare this with about 70% prior to Adpocalypse. The second issue is that the ad quality has gone down. And what I mean by that is there are different tiers of ads on YouTube. There are what are called reserve ads, which are the good ones. And then there are auction ads, which are the not so well-paying ones. We used to have about a 50-50 split between high and low quality ads. We now have 1% high quality ads. So this is a combination of factors, and it's a disaster. Now, when this happened to us, I wondered, I said to myself, is this just happening to us? Is this happening to other progressive YouTubers? So I started reaching out to many of the people that I'm in touch with who you would absolutely know, but they might not want to be, publicly mentioned, so I won't mention them. But all the names you're probably familiar with. And I started saying, hey, are you experiencing this as of July 1st? And everybody, all of these progressive YouTubers are experiencing the exact same thing. Now, do I believe someone is deliberately hurting progressive YouTubers by messing with the YouTube algorithm? No, I'm not saying that. It's possible, but I have no evidence of that. What I am telling you is that the effect of this is that it's endangering progressive media. Progressive media is particularly in danger as a result of this. And as I told you yesterday, there's a 3-pronged destructive attack of circumstances on progressive YouTubers right now. Number one, the Trump administration wants more legal options against media outlets. This includes libel lawsuits. This includes going legally, criminally after media publishers of information that a leaker provided to them, which would be a significant change in U.S. policy on that issue. Number two, we've got the attempt to roll back Obama-era net neutrality regulations, which would also be a disaster for independent producers like us. And number three, you've got the YouTube advertiser boycott, which continues to be a redistribution of advertising dollars away from independent producers like us to corporate media. It's bad. I mean, there's no other way that I can explain to you that this is absolutely crushing. And whether it's us or some other show, the important thing is, if you want to see these programs survive, you should seriously consider making some financial contribution, as small as it may be. It doesn't have to be our show. If there's some other show you like better, and if you look at the YouTube comments on our channel, I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that there are many people who like other shows better than this one. Whatever show you like, consider making a contribution, because this is a major, major big deal. Membership is an option. As I've told you before, you can sign up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership. You pick a monthly or yearly membership. You click on that red sign up button, and then you will see a coupon code field. You can get a 40% discount off of membership by using the coupon code IVoted17. If you don't want to deal with any of the membership stuff and you don't have time to watch more content, you can go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is quick and easy. You're just throwing us $1 a month or $2 a month or whatever amount works for you. And that will help to offset the impact of this 3-pronged attack on independent media that is disproportionately affecting progressive programs like ours. It's bad out there, Pat, and I just want to be totally upfront with everybody about what's going on.
Sure, and different channels, different shows are taking a different response to this, and for some that may mean taking their full show off of YouTube, something that we don't want to do.
Absolutely.
For others, it just means incorporating the YouTube advertiser boycott in their day-to-day content.
Sure.
And for some others, it may be sponsored material on their channels.
Right.
And we just think that mentioning it in this format is the best way for us, because it just fits what we do every day.
My approach is, if we can get enough people to replace the lost revenue with $1 here and there, we don't have to change anything. And that would really be the ideal situation for us. The Donald Trump Justice Department, led by Jeff Sessions, has abruptly settled a money laundering case with a Russian real estate company. The company in question is Previzon. They've agreed to pay a $6 million penalty to avoid a trial. This is a $6 million fine for the alleged money laundering of $230 million by tax fraud. This took place in May. Sort of sounds cheap, right? $230 million in alleged tax fraud, and you get away with a penalty of just $6 million, and you completely avoid going to trial. Seemed a little bit odd in May, but now it is much more concerning, because you know who the lawyer is that was representing Prevezon? Her name is, wait for it, Natalia Veselnitskaya, the same Russian lawyer who we learned this week met with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort to deliver dirt on Hillary Clinton meant to help Donald Trump win. Sort of strange that if we believe Donald Trump Jr.'s story, that while she promised dirt, she didn't deliver dirt. Just as things are starting to heat up, we figure out that she was involved in the settlement for only 2.6% of the allegedly laundered amount of money. I'll give you the numbers once more because they're so stunning. This was a trial that was set to happen over $230 million in money laundering. They were able to settle for $6 million. That's 2.6% of the amount of money allegedly laundered. House Democrats aren't happy. They wrote a letter demanding to know why this was settled so suddenly and so cheaply. A quote from that letter says, quote, "Last summer, Donald Trump Jr. met with a Kremlin-connected attorney in an attempt to obtain information that would incriminate Hillary. Earlier this year, on May 12, 2017, the Department of Justice made an abrupt decision to settle a money laundering case being handled by that same attorney in the Southern District of New York. We write with some concern that the two events may be connected and that the State Department may have settled the case at a loss for the United States in order to obscure the underlying facts." This attorney is increasingly a character of interest. Here she is pictured during a Foreign Affairs Committee hearing about Russia in 2014. How did she get a front row seat to this hearing? According to McFaul, she was invited by Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher. We have a tweet here from Michael McFaul, the ambassador. "I've been told that Congressman Rohrabacher invited her to the hearing. Someone should confirm with his office. He is also anti-sanctions." Why is that interesting? Well, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher was one of the two people mentioned back in, remember those leaked tapes where you had Republican Congressman Kevin McCarthy on audio tape saying, "There's two people I think that Putin pays, Rohrabacher and Trump."
Right.
Very interesting that every aspect of this is coming full circle.
And then the room laughed, and he goes, no, I'm serious, right?
Yeah, Paul Ryan said something about, we're not talking about that. This is an off-the-record meeting, right? And then people laughed. I know I say this a lot. You can't write this stuff. At this point, you'd need a 4-hour documentary just to sort out all the elements of this story that this particular Russian lawyer is involved in, never mind Donald Trump.
Well, to add another component to this, she might have been in the country illegally, too. She was denied a visa in 2015, and then she was on immigration parole in the early months of 2016, wasn't able to get that visa renewed.
That's right.
And, we wouldn't normally bring this up, but when you have the president who goes on and on about illegal immigration and how we need to up our vetting procedures because we just don't know who's coming into the country and what illegal acts they can be committing, it's completely hypocritical. And it turns out the illegal acts may be with Trump himself. And
the Trump defenders are actually blaming that entire thing, the entire immigration status thing on Obama. And it's just amazing what's going on. Anyway, that's the latest. Very, very disturbing stuff. You can talk about this with us on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/Reddit.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Molly McKew, who is a foreign policy and strategy consultant and an information warfare expert. Molly, you had this great article in Politico a few days ago titled "Trump Handed Putin a Stunning Victory," and it had everything to do with what we saw at the G20 in Germany, as well as what came out of the, I don't even know if private is the right term since we've gotten a readout of this meeting, but this meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And you go into detail about what we've learned in terms of whose priorities seem to be met and acquiesced to during this meeting and a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's sort of start at the top level. What came out of the meeting that's most notable to you?
I think, coming out of the meeting right away, I think the most obvious thing is the warmth between the two leaders. There was obviously a very amicable meeting. They were both trying to make a good impression on the other. And this is very notable, I think. But the readout from Secretary Tillerson just after the meeting sort of laid out three key deliverables. One of those sort of began with this idea that President Trump raised the idea of the election hacking with President Putin, and then they sort of agreed, well, we're never going to agree on this, so let's move on and move forward and find ways to work together. And those will now be in the form of a joint cybersecurity working group, the notion of which is completely absurd, that we will mutually agree to find ways not to meddle in each other's internal affairs, and that we will find there's a new ceasefire agreement announced in a very limited way on a part of southwestern Syria. And what's so stunning about all of these things is they line up right behind the Russian narrative. In the first, it's saying, well, Russia probably didn't meddle in anything in the US because now we're going to work with them on finding solutions to all of our cybersecurity challenges that we all have. And this is just absolute nonsense. The idea that we're going to work with the country that our intelligence services know attacked us to find, quote, solutions to these problems. If that working group is ever formed, the only purpose of it will be to hand intelligence on the United States to Russia. The second is, again, this acquiescence to this long-term Russian narrative that everything wrong inside Russia, every time there's a demonstration or a protest against Putin, is because the US is funding it, or George Soros is funding it, or some outside force is mobilizing people against the great leader. So again, this is just sort of this Russian narrative nonsense. And in Syria, I've also written about this fairly extensively in Politico, but it will be impossible for the United States to work with Russia in Syria. We do not share common goals, and hearing the Secretary of State say that we do, and that we will find ways to work together moving forward, when Russia's alliance in Syria is Iran and Iranian militias and Hezbollah and Hamas and other very unsavory forces. Again, this is just sort of shocking, but it's an absolute acquiescence of US leadership in Europe and in the Middle East and in the world.
At the top level, there's been the reaction from some apologists, some of whom have actually written to me, who say, wait a second, why are people against having better relations with Russia? Shouldn't we be applauding that our relationship with Russia seems to be improving? What's wrong with that approach?
So it's, I think those of us that have worked in the Russian periphery for the last decade are particularly sensitive to this narrative, because this is always what the forces that the Kremlin cultivates. Typically, they're not Marine Le Pen-like figures. They're not these super pro-Russia, super pro-Putin political actors. That's usually the question that they bring. Wouldn't it be better if we could have better relations with Russia? And the answer to that is obviously yes. It would be great if we could have a better relationship with Russia. The problem being Russia has never demonstrated that it would like to have a better relationship with us, particularly with the United States of America, which it still declares as its primary enemy in the world. And until we accept that language and hold them accountable for what they're doing to our own country, first and foremost, the fact that there will be no consequences for Russia for what they did to American society in our election is absolutely unconscionable and a complete abdication of responsibility from the president. So that alone is bad enough, but it's not just that, it's everything else. Everywhere Russia is sort of advancing its interests through military means, through informational means, through intelligence operations, through financial and political operations, where they are not held accountable for directly disrupting the interests of other nations. They will keep doing these things, and they will keep using these sort of shadowy tactics and shadow warfare to achieve their interests in the world. And that is directly to our disadvantage and to the disadvantage of American security and American prosperity and a number of other things.
Along those lines, we're still learning the extent to which this Donald Trump Jr. meeting with a Russian lawyer and those revelations are going to impact the broader investigation into Trump and Russia collusion. But putting the specifics of that aside just for a second, we're continuing to see some defenders of Donald Trump who seem convinced that regardless of whether or not there were attempts from Russia to influence or collude with the United States for Donald Trump's benefit, that they've sort of gotten nothing out of it, right? And I hear often that, hey, how stupid was it for Russia to try to get Trump elected? Because Trump's done nothing for them. Nothing has improved for Russia since Donald Trump got into power. We've got a pretty significantly growing list of ways in which Donald Trump's election has so far been a pretty significant game changer for Russia, hasn't it? And this includes the three issues that you write about that came out of that G20 meeting between Trump and Russia. This includes the immediate attempts to start rethinking sanctions and return these two compounds in, I believe it's Maryland and New York. It's quite a list.
Absolutely, and Russia has been very clear about that. The spokesman for Putin came out after just yesterday, so after the meeting, and said, yeah, we agreed to all sorts of stuff, and we expect President Trump to start delivering. He hasn't yet. If he doesn't, we're going to take retaliatory measures, and that was really notable. And I think this is so there's sort of the tactical list of items is a key thing to look at. Are we making concessions on sanctions? Are we giving back diplomatic properties when they have done nothing to be held accountable for the action that took those away? All these other things on the list that people are keeping a close eye on. But the other part of that piece that I wrote in Politico was about the rhetoric that President Trump used in Poland. And I think this is actually the greatest concession to Putin from this trip. For the last, since he entered the Kremlin, but certainly for the last 10 years, and especially since just before the annexation of Crimea, Putin has been aggressively advancing this new narrative of the world that has been sort of based on his own decade-long revision of history and everybody's place in history, part of which is this sort of repetition that democratic governance is essentially an anomaly in history, and moving forward it will move back to more traditional systems. But what you heard from President Trump was this really remarkable, how do you give a speech in Poland without mentioning democracy? I mean, it's virtually impossible for an American president to do that, and yet he did. He didn't talk about our alliances. He talked about sovereignty, which is exactly how Russia talks about itself. He didn't talk about values. He talked about this idea of civilization, which, absent the concept of Western values, means a very different thing that is anchored in a 1,000-year-old history and sort of has a more ethno-religious identity. It has very little to do with the post-World War II liberal democratic world order. He didn't talk about rights. He talked about traditional values and identity, and these ideas of destiny, and all of these things sort of link to this liberal worldview that a handful of leaders, many of whom Trump has given significant time to, including Putin, including the leader of Poland, including people like Viktor Orban in Hungary, the leader in the Philippines, but these people who espouse this new liberal worldview, this idea that liberal democracy, small L liberal democracy, but the concept of what has given the United States its greatest security and prosperity in history is somehow something that needs to be undone. And hearing the American president repeat those ideas and sort of align the U.S. behind them during that speech in Poland is very significant. I think we're very slow to hear what he's actually telling us. This was not a new speech. It was the continuation of his American Carnage inauguration speech, but on an international stage. And until we hear what he is telling us, which is that he does not believe in the core values that we believe are essential to our identity in the world, and he is telling his core supporters in the United States that these are things that are no longer important, and those ideas are starting to spread, and people are starting to echo them, and this is really going to change how our allies view us, how we are positioned in the world, and our own attempts to be secure and to access markets and to grow our economy. This is going to have really significant impact on the United States of America.
Well, that's why, Molly, I'm concerned when I see we've got some pretty interesting recent polling about how significantly the reputation of the U.S. as a trustworthy ally, as the place to go when you need to talk about whether it be technology to fight climate change or whatever the case may be. The reputation of the U.S. has already been pretty significantly damaged under Donald Trump, and I feel as though there are many Trump supporters who see this as sort of validation, like if other countries don't like what we're doing, it must be because it's so good for us and bad for them. But it sort of misses that this is not good. The U.S. standing being affected in this way around the world It's bad for national security. It's bad for economics. It's bad for education, technology. I mean, this is going to affect people whether or not they realize it, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think part of this is that our leaders have done a very bad job explaining this for a really long time, and that matters. And, you know, part of the reason that it's been so easy to give the hardcore Trump supporters these very quick talking points that they've echoed about NATO being worthless and everybody being out to get us and everything's unfair and trade is unfair is that nobody really explains what has been important about the last 70 years of our history. And I think this notion that Europe is a free rider and it's just sort of been mooching off the US since the Marshall Plan and we've been doing everything for them and it doesn't matter to us and we should stop is really, really off base. And I mean, yes, we invested a ton of money in European economy and security, but what that did was build a market for our goods. It moved us from being a significant global economy to being a global superpower economy. It moved us from being a significant global power to being, you know, the superpower in terms of military and power in the world. And all of that was because we built a market and we built an alliance that amplified our power and our reach into the world. And that's really significant. And we have to understand what that means.
We've been speaking with Molly McKew, foreign policy and strategy consultant, information warfare expert. The article is in Politico, Trump handed Putin a stunning victory. Molly, great as always to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've now learned that just before Jared Kushner pushed his father-in-law Donald Trump to take a hard stance on Qatar, that he failed to get a $500 million loan from Qatar. Trump will run the country like a business, we heard. And that seems to have happened, a very, very corrupt business at that. Remember when Donald Trump went hard against Qatar? And it sort of surprised everyone, including Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Jared Kushner advised Donald Trump to do that. And just before he gave that advice, he tried and failed to get a $500 million loan from one of Qatar's richest businessmen. You might have heard of 666 Fifth Avenue, right? This is a building that Kushner bought a while ago, and it hasn't been doing that well. It's quite vacant, and they're having all sorts of problems. And to try to keep the building business afloat, Kushner went to a Qatari billionaire known as HBJ, not LBJ, but HBJ, Hamad bin Abdullah Al Thani. And HBJ agreed to invest $500 million if Jared Kushner could come up with the rest of the money that they needed for this project. Long story short, Kushner couldn't come up with the rest of the money. So HBJ said, no thanks, not interested in the deal. Or according to some other source, he said, well, let's at least put it on hold for now. The bottom line is, the $500 million wasn't going to be given to Jared Kushner's company anytime soon. Shortly thereafter, 6 Gulf countries severed or reduced ties with Qatar under the supposed pretense that, quote, they support terrorism. And immediately, Donald Trump comes out aggressively, seemingly out of the blue, saying Qatar is a funder of terrorism at a very high level. Rex Tillerson, our Secretary of State, was by all accounts surprised by this position of Donald Trump's, and according to sources believed that it was Jared Kushner who was behind the entire thing. And a source that's close to Tillerson told the American Conservative that the Secretary of State is convinced that some of Donald Trump's remarks about this issue were written by the UAE ambassador Youssef Al Otaiba, a close friend of none other than Jared Kushner. The Independent News Service went to Jared Kushner for comment. No comment has been received. This is just bad for the country. This is bad for you, whoever you are that's listening, assuming you live in the United States. This is using political capital to fight personal battles. And in some cases, it's personal business battles for Jared Kushner. And none of this is a surprise. And this is why I've been saying, Pat, that the Trumpists were bamboozled. This was completely predictable. Anyone who paid even the tiniest bit of attention, if you voted for Trump, you're responsible for this. And I ask you, how is Trump using the power of the Oval Office to punish them for turning down business deals for his son-in-law? How is that good for you?
This makes it seem as though Jared Kushner is more powerful and has more say than Rex Tillerson does. And not like Rex Tillerson's a great guy, but he at least is the Secretary of State. He at least had to go through a Senate confirmation process.
Sure.
The whole reason that Jared Kushner is there is because he's the son-in-law to the president. And then you add up these things about deliberately lying 3 times on that disclosure form about contacts with Russians. It's just all very, very sketchy, and there's no easy way to get this guy out of power.
This is the foreign policy that should be the purview of the Secretary of State, as depraved and corrupt as the Secretary of State may be. And that has been hijacked as a negotiating tool for the profit of Donald Trump's family. It's bad out there. Also bad are reports from the WHO about untreatable cases of what they're calling superbug gonorrhea, saying that we need new medications to treat the bacterial infection. A study was published in the journal PLOS Medicine, which highlights the increased drug-resistant gonorrhea, and it is being called a serious situation, so serious that now the standard course of treatment, as per the direction of the WHO to doctors, is that patients should be given 2 antibiotics for the STD because of the resistance that's emerging. And this could have a major effect on world population. I mean, it's sort of Malthusian in some sense, but 78 million people per year are affected with gonorrhea. Women usually never show symptoms. 40% of men never show symptoms. If you don't treat it, because why would you if you have no symptoms, men and women can become infertile as well as be at extra risk of HIV. From 2009 to 2014, 97% of countries that reported gonorrhea data say that they found drug-resistant strains. 2/3 of countries are reporting resistance to what's called the last resort treatment. When standard medications don't work for many conditions, you have what are called last resort treatments. For gonorrhea, it is the oral antibiotic cefixime and the injectable ceftriaxone. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correct. Ceftriaxone. And that is a major, major problem. And these are, there are strains of this that are not being cured even with the last line, last resort medication. And those have been reported in France, Japan, and Spain. What's contributing to drug resistance? It's a few different things. Decreased condom use, more urbanization. In other words, more people living closer together. More travel, which allows for people spreading the disease a greater distance, as well as lower detection rates and improper or failed treatment. And what is also concerning is that there are still people, according to the data that we have, that are not taking the full course of antibiotics. And it is so prevalent, Pat, that people think, fine, I got 14 days of antibiotics. If I feel better after 6 days, I'll not take the rest. It's common that if the antibiotic works, that you feel better after 6 days. You're given 14 days for a reason, and not taking the full dose can actually allow the bacteria to become resistant.
Well, I think there's also just people out there who are against antibiotics, against contraception, and just push for abstinence-only education because, of course, if you just tell people not to have sex, they won't do it, and the diseases won't spread.
Yeah, and of course, as we know, the reality is that when you do that type of sex education, people are just engaging in riskier versions of the same behavior that they might otherwise be engaging in, and it is a really, really bad idea and also completely counterproductive. Take all the pills, number one, and number two, you've got to... The entire abstinence-only thing, it's failed on every level at this point, hasn't it? I mean, there's no level on which it's been successful. It doesn't reduce pregnancy. It doesn't reduce transmission of STDs. It doesn't reduce abortions because when people get pregnant, pregnancy is the number one common thread among people who obtain abortions. And if you have more pregnancies, by definition, you're going to have more people seeking abortions.
It's like trying to solve obesity by telling people not to eat.
I like that.
No explanation necessary.
I've never heard that one before, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Let's go to your voicemails. 219-2-David-P. The infamous Troy York, who has called in under various pseudonyms, Cecil Brewster. He has a Hispanic name that he calls in under. Anyway, he called in again saying that he is not watching the show anymore, apparently, because it's fake news.
David Pakman. I did not listen to your show today, but
okay.
I'd be willing to say that you started the show off with mentioning Donald Trump in the first sentence, and half your show was fake news.
Precisely
Thank
half.
you.
Yeah. It wasn't a quarter of the show that was fake news yesterday. It wasn't 75% of the show. Exactly half of the show was fake news.
Well, that's a problem because how do you know which half it is?
Right,
You know, you don't know what to believe.
Well, apparently it was the first half because he didn't like how the show he knew started. All right, Troy, very, very interesting. MVP caller for sure. On the bonus show today, Oregon may soon decriminalize heroin, cocaine, and meth, or at least reduce the criminalization of it. Former President Jimmy Carter has made a solar farm to power half of his city. And the Third Circuit Court of Philadelphia has determined you, I don't know who you is, but you, if you're in the United States, have the right to film the police. And that is a very, very important declaration, which we will dig into on today's bonus show. Sign up, get instant access to the bonus show, as well as the world's famous commercial-free Access Pass at davidpakman.com/membership. Coupon code is available. I voted 17. Patreon is available. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show for those smaller pledges of $1 or $2 a month. We will talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.